oftentimes when people have experienced that type of trauma in their relationships early on and it's never been resolved, they're still living like things that might have been harmful to them as a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old or a 10-year-old. They're still receiving it in that way now. You'll see people that, a relationship ends and they think they're gonna die.
Welcome to the Brain Fit Podcast, where we share the cutting-edge science on how you can improve your memory and live a happier, healthier life.
Welcome, Ryan Soave. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm grateful to be here.
And so I'm just delighted to have you. You had such a wonderful interview on the world famous Andrew Huberman podcast, the Huberman Lab. It's such a treat to have you here. Now, I want to start with something. So you're an expert in trauma, in helping people end addiction. You're a world-class therapist. I want to ask you something kind of controversial to start us out here. A lot of people are using AI and specifically ChatGPT as a therapist. What is your perspective on this? Is this good? Is this bad? Is this helpful? Is this dangerous? What do people need to know about this?
I think the answer is probably somewhere in all of those things, depending like anything else in how it's used and what it's used for. I am not an AI expert by any means. I can tell you where my concerns lie. I think if you want strategy and ways to reason and logic through things, I think asking ChatGPT for those strategies and tools is very helpful. But a lot of what therapy is, because a lot of what people are, is more complex. And sometimes it's often not as a therapist, when I'm with somebody. I remember one of my mentors had said to me when I was taking my first group as a therapist, and I was really nervous. I was scared that I wasn't going to do a good job. I really was just stressed out and nervous. And I remember she said to me, "Ryan, you don't need all the answers. Sometimes you just need to bear witness and hold space." And I've found that in my practice to come to be true, that a lot of what emerges from the silence and just being with somebody in resonance is much more magical than like anything that I could give them as a tool. That said, oftentimes I'm working with people and giving them tools and strategies to be able to utilize in their daily life to manage their symptoms and maybe be able to lean into discomfort and do other things like that. So I think that's where ChatGPT or other tools like that become very, very helpful. I was dealing with a couple of years ago. I had something really challenging happen near our home. It was actually like this act of violence happened right outside our home.
Oh, goodness.
My family wasn't there. I was, and it impacted me. I was right kind of there as it happened. And it really impacted me. It wasn't something that I had done. It was just something that was there, and it had a significant impact where I kept reliving it. I was having like a post-traumatic experience around it. And I felt like I couldn't protect my family. I have little kids, the older kid and my wife, and that's the most important thing to me. And I was having physical symptoms, just like the people that I work with trauma and PTSD. And I just kept running this through my head. I can't protect my family. I can't protect my family. And I haven't even shared this with him, but I actually was on the phone with my friend Andrew Huberman, and I said to him, "I can't protect my family." And he said back to me, he just said, "You did. You were just the lightning rod." And that opened up something for me, that like I had absorbed this energy for my family. Like if they had been there and didn't, like maybe it would have impacted them in a different way. And when he said that, it like this weight came off of me. I felt this opening, and I still had to do some work around it, but there was like almost an instantaneous impact to go, okay, I can see this a different way. I thought about that a lot afterwards, and especially in related to AI. I think that I could have probably typed that scenario in, and it may have come back with the same words that he said to me. But I don't know that it would have impacted me in the same way, because he knows me. Our relationship has weight and depth, right? He knows what I value, what's important to me. And hearing it reflected back from someone I trust and know, I can't imagine that coming out on a screen and or from an agent having that impact, and
So the value of the relationship between the client and the therapist and the depth of that relationship can be very therapeutic, very healing, and it increases trust that right now is likely not available with a large language model. At least it doesn't seem that way. Human connection seems to have a much more significant and different feeling and significance for us.
yeah, especially, I mean, it's a reasoning model, right? And we're dealing with things that are unreasonable and unrealistic often, and uh in the stories that people are making up around the narratives that they're making up around whatever happened. The other concerns I have around it is just like and maybe this will be developed, but like the ethics and when we've seen these cases where people have been talking about suicide, if they're talking to me as a therapist, as my license, I'm held up against this board of ethics where I have a duty to report these things. If I see someone that's gonna immediately endanger themselves, like I have things that I need to do next, and people that I would contact next that can get them help right away, where I don't know that that's there yet with the
Yeah, what are the dangers or pauses for concern that someone might want to consider before using it for themselves or for their children or for their spouse? What what are the potential dangers or conflicts of interest that might arise?
Well, I mean, I think, believe it or not, people aren't always honest in therapy. Like, not only because they're like trying to lie, but we're poor historians, right? So when you're just typing something in, they're getting your side or your version of what's happening. And as a therapist, even when I go to my therapist, I have a relationship with her, and she can kind of cut through some of that stuff where I might not be seeing what is as it is. I might be seeing it through the current lens of stress that I'm experiencing versus like what I might say if I'm upset with somebody or somebody I feel did me wrong, and I'm putting this one side into it. You're going to get a certain response back, or they understand what the depth of the relationship is. If somebody really upset me on that a stranger upset me, and I felt threatened by them, it might spit back and tell me to avoid them at all costs to end that relationship, where it might be something that I'm perceived as a threat with my wife or another person that I love in a relationship that's more important, where that might not require just such a simple, like, leave the relationship. And I'm not saying that's what it says, but those are there's these nuanced, and I'm not someone that says I want to protect my job because, or it needs to be protected from AI. I think there's a combination of the two. Our therapy and behavioral health in general, right, does a poor job, I think, of being objective in certain cases, because we're dealing with such a subjective nature. We can't take a blood test and see what range of depression people are in. So and oftentimes we're dealing with what they're presenting with today versus what might be in their treatment plan over a period of time. So that objective nature that can be brought with tools that might be provided by AI with the human component, I think that's where we need to be looking, not one versus the other, but both and how can they work with each other? Like, just like I know, working with an interdisciplinary team, like, people are going to see things through a medical lens, through a behavioral health lens, through a behavioral lens, psychiatric, all of that. And we want to be able to disagree and work together in a way that, the way I see it as a therapist and the way that you see it as a doctor might be a little bit different. But when we can challenge each other in that way, then we can create a better treatment plan for the person that we're working with.
If you or someone you love has Alzheimer's or another form of dementia, I want you to know there is hope. Alzheimer's is preventable, and it is even reversible. In fact, we are reversing Alzheimer's in my medical clinic here in Florida. My partner and medical director is Dr. Josh Hellman, a medical doctor trained at Harvard who specializes in preventing and reversing Alzheimer's disease, and we are reversing Alzheimer's in our patients. If you'd like to learn more about working with us to both prevent Alzheimer's and even reverse Alzheimer's and reverse memory loss associated with other forms of dementia, we would love to hear from you and send you some free information so you can learn what we are doing and see if it's a fit for you to come down and work with us in our clinic. We also work with other clinics around the country to help patients both prevent Alzheimer's as well as to reverse Alzheimer's and reverse memory loss associated with dementia. So if you'd like to learn more, go to brainpowerclinics.com. Go to brainpowerclinics.com and then enter your information. We will send you some free information, and then we hope to work with you, if we can be helpful to you, to help you prevent and reverse Alzheimer's disease. That is really helpful. So something you mentioned off camera that I found really fascinating. For those of you married, you're going to really find this interesting. You talked about how our history shapes us. And so I'm not married as of today, but if I were arguing with my wife, it's really kind of my past history and trauma is arguing with her past history and trauma. That's really kind of who shows up under those stressed environments and those conflict. Can you talk about that, about how our history shapes us and how that relates to conflict, especially conflict in intimate relationships?
Yeah, I mean, we're shaped, specifically in our formative years. I mean, I think a lot of people come to me, why is it important to maybe look at my childhood and understand these things in order to understand myself now? And simply put, I mean, we call those years our formative years. And I think they're called our formative years because that's when everything's forming, right? Very simply put, our brain is developing. I think we're going through that whole you would know better than I, but the whole pairing process where we're trying to like understand, and then we start to understand relationships. Our ego is developing, right? We're moving through these different developmental stages where we see things very differently. We are very different. A child, something that's threatening to a child, like abandonment or neglect, for a 2-year-old can be deadly. Or 2-month-old, right? They can't care for themselves, right? If this is not true for me, it's kind of, but if my mom had left me alone in the woods when I was a month old, I'd probably be dead. If she'd left me alone for a month, I'd die, unless there was some miracle. I'm 49. If she leaves me alone for a month, we can get along better, right? Like that's kind of, I actually love my mom, but a lot of people and I love spending time with her, but a lot of people that's true for. Like as an adult, I can't be abandoned in that way or neglected in a way because I can care for myself. But oftentimes when people have experienced that type of trauma in their relationships early on and it's never been resolved, they're still living like things that might have been harmful to them as a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old or a 10-year-old. They're still receiving it in that way now. You'll see people that, a relationship ends and they think they're going to die. Or we actually see people people can kill themselves or kill somebody else because they feel like they can't live without that relationship or without that job or without that amount of money. And I think that's a product of something not being resolved and how they were shaped and learned how to be in a relationship. Right? Our primary caregivers, whether they're present or not present, are the first people that we have. They're the first men and women that we have relationships with. And we learn about that. And we learn from the history before then. Many years ago, I was working in China, walking through an airport. I smelled something it made that I don't have hair in my head, but I think I still had some on the back of my neck. It stood up, right? It was disgusting to me. And I walked around and I looked, and this family with kids was eating this like dried fish out of a bag. It looked like one of those candy bags you see hanging in a candy store, gas station, with a clear, and they were eating it like it was candy and they were loving it. And I was I couldn't even stand near it. And it hit me then like, okay, taste is informed by our environment, by the history. And if taste is informed or can be informed, why wouldn't everything else? And this is where I think we're going to continue to see the nature nurture argument kind of collapse, not collapse in a neck, but come together more. This is where we're seeing in the field of epigenetics that we're like impacted by where we grew up. If you grow up in certain areas of the world, you eat more pasta, certain areas of the world, you do this, but behaviors are the same. Now, with our families and our formative years, we tend to either adopt those patterns or rebel against them. Now, I want to just go off on a slight tangent with you. So I love sardines. So I think part of that disgust that you felt was lack of control. Right. So if nails on a chalkboard, much more harmful to someone who's not doing it. Right. Because if we control it, much less stressful. Similarly, loud noises. I learned this from Wyatt Woodsmall. Those loud noises that we don't control are stressful to us. The loud noises that we do control, much less stressful. And so I think there's You're firing a gun versus shooting a gun.
Right. Or I have my music up loud. Right. But you're my neighbor and you don't control it. It's just, or you're at Burning Man and you can't sleep because it's loud music, kind of stressful. Whereas if you're the DJ, you're like, oh, this is awesome. right? And so if it's your fish and you can control the smell, that feels different. And then I travel with sardines. When I eat sardines, I eat it right next to a trash can, never on a plane. And I just eat it right there, and then I throw it away right there because I don't want to have subject anyone else to the smell. But I'm standing right next to the trash can. Sometimes people spot me like, "Hey, are you Dr. Love?" I'm like, "Yes." And you caught me eating my sardines next to the trash can. So I try to be really mindful of where I eat them.
I don't think that's really a tangent, right? Because what we learn and how we learn in relationships as in our formative years is what that becomes kind of our locus of control. Like I know how to deal, even if you're in an abusive situation as a child, not a great thing, but they learn how to survive that, and they kind of have a locus of control around dealing with if it's their father, abusive, controlling men, and the problem happens when that doesn't get resolved. So now all men, right, becomes a fixed belief that all men are dangerous and controlling, and they start applying that to all relationships, right? And that can become challenging.
Like to thank our sponsor, Danger Coffee. So coffee is terrific for your brain. I like to drink it almost every day. Some days I drink matcha, but most days I'm drinking coffee, organic coffee. Coffee improves focus, memory, and attention. Coffee can help reduce the accumulation of amyloid plaque in the brain, and coffee is really good for your gut bacteria. But it's really important to drink a high-quality coffee that is organic and mold-free. This is the highest quality coffee that I'm drinking. I really like this one. This one's my favorite because I know it's certified mold-free. This is a really big deal. So organic is not enough. A lot of organic coffee can have mold in it. This is coffee by Dave Asprey. You see I have his book right here. Dave Asprey is one of the world's leading biohackers. I've been following his stuff for years. He makes the highest quality products, especially the coffees. This is certified mold-free and it's organic and it tastes great. If you want to try this, we got a great coupon for you. So you can get this at the link below and you can try this absolutely risk-free. I've had 2 cups of this today. This is really great quality coffee, great tasting. I like to blend it with MCT oil and a little bit of monk fruit sugar, and that's fantastic. By the way, I learned about MCT oil from Dave Asprey, and so he's the reason why I make my coffee the way that I do. So if you like coffee, give this a try. So if someone has an abusive parent, how that can be applied to future relationships, and what that looks like. Because I don't know if people, I don't fully understand this, and I don't know if people understand the effect of. So I was in the Landmark Forum, which I think is a really helpful self-development program, and someone came up and said, "Listen, all men are abusive alcoholics." And the person said, "Tell me more." They said, "Well, my dad was an abusive alcoholic. My husband number 1 was an abusive alcoholic. Husband number 2 is an abusive alcoholic. My current boyfriend is an abusive alcoholic." And then the forum leader said, "Why do you keep choosing to be in relationships with abusive alcoholics?" And she's paused and she said, "Oh my gosh, I'm actually either attracting or choosing men that look like my father." And then she sat down with a big smile, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, what a revelation!" So can you talk about those formative years, especially our parents, and how that shapes our future relationships?
So in that, let's start with that example. So in that example, let's say this is the man that, it became, like all men are like this, right? That became a fixed belief. If you look at the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, one of the things is that we're left with these kind of fixed beliefs about ourselves, the world. Those aren't the exact words they use, but in her, it would make sense in her environment to think of men as dangerous, controlling, alcoholic, because when she can see that, she can interact with it, right, as a child. That's helpful to her to survive the environment with her father. Now, if that's all she kind of sees, right, now she's going to start, it's like all you see is the hammer, everything's a nail kind of saying. Like if now, let's say she goes out in the world and sees that, she might see men that aren't that and just assign that to them, right? Because she hasn't realized that she was doing this as a fixed belief, right? Like you don't want to go the other way. Like if let's just say the word dangerous, like if she had a fixed belief that all men are dangerous. Now if that's fixed and not kind of dealt with or resolved, right? She's going to, even when she wants to be in a relationship with a man, there might be something even unconsciously assuming that he's dangerous, and that can impact that relationship. Now, then it could impact if she wants to be friends with men, or when she has a son, if she has a son, impact that relationship in a way that she has this fixed view of who they are. The other part of that is those are the waters she swam in. That I don't think it was choice, and that she's like, oh, how can I find the next drunken controlling dangerous man. She obviously didn't, because she was shocked by the question that the forum leader asked. But those are the waters she swims in. She knows how to deal with that kind of man. In fact, when she sees a man that's probably loving and kind and sharing, so there's probably like a part that's like, how am I going to deal with this?
Yeah, or distrust. She's like, what the heck is this? I haven't encountered this before, so I'm going to discard this because I don't understand this. But they do understand. This person did understand alcoholics. She's like, oh, alcoholic man, I know what this is. I know how to do this.
And it's more like in the physiology, in how your nervous system is kind of resonating with it. It's not usually a cognitive thing like, oh, he's alcoholic, I'm excited about him, right? It's just, that's the energy that they know how to survive. It's kind of like you see people that win the lottery or they get a bunch of money and then they go broke. Like they didn't know how to deal with that yet. They hadn't learned how to deal with being in kind of a new environment. They knew how to be in, it's kind of the waters we swim in, and we know that. And you can't just, you can, but it's very challenging to just take someone out of one pool that they're swimming in into something completely different, even if it's better. They don't know yet.
So you don't know how. You talk about PTSD and fixed beliefs. Does trauma create fixed beliefs? And so, speaking of this young child, you mentioned the strategy at first was adaptive, understanding adult men to be alcoholics, potentially dangerous, but not so adaptive as an adult woman. Is that true with other traumas? Do other traumas create potential fixed beliefs where if someone's coming back from war and they hear a loud noise, they're used to thinking that could be a bomb, whereas that doesn't apply if you're walking along the streets in your average city? Is that what trauma is? Changing of fixed beliefs?
Yeah, not to keep going back to him, but we talked about it on his podcast, and it's something that Andrew's said before, that he sees the fastest way to brain plasticity is through a traumatic event, and I think that's true. Like a significant traumatic, like life-threatening event can alter the way we see the world like this, because it needs to. Like I don't think we weren't really evolved yet. I think technology has surpassed our human evolution. Like we're not that far away from, 150 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, being nomadic. And now like we can jump on a plane and fly anywhere in the world. I mean, it's like, we will be like, oh, this plane flight to China is 13 hours. For somebody 100 years ago, that's like teleportation. I mean, it's unbelievable how much. So, I think our brain and our nervous system is like, if this thing happens, like this is potentially going to happen wherever. I mean, we see this with combat, especially because nowadays there's not really uniforms. They're seeing a threat as somebody on the street with a cell phone. Now they come home. It's very different than, probably World War II, where they still had these things. But the other thing, World War II, we didn't even have antibiotics. This is kind of off topic, right? I mean, and we didn't have the medical care, being able to get people. So people are living with more significant injury than they would have historically in other wars. I mean,
oh, great point. So people would have died in World War II from a more simple wound, where today people will survive, but now they're surviving with that trauma from the thing that left them without a limb or so forth.
Yeah, but it does change our it can change our beliefs very quickly, and not our beliefs necessarily. I'm not talking about like our spiritual beliefs, but like what is safe and what isn't, right? There's a part of our nervous system that, in the brain that we want it to hijack us when we're under threat, and take over, and if we experience that, I believe what's happening is it's resetting us to go, okay, this could happen at any moment. And so then we're left with these kind of fixed beliefs. Now, when a child lives in an environment over time where it might not be a life-threatening trauma every day, but they learn and they're kind of shaped. I mean, and it could be shaped in a way like my dad's an alcoholic. It could be shaped in the way that my mom or dad are a helicopter parent and they take care of everything. And now that's not resolved. They go in the world, and even though they're smart enough to understand that they've got to work hard for something, or that failure, they'll read a book that says failure, there's more success out of failure than there is out of, winning. Like we learn more, that the sense that they have in their body is that I don't know how to deal with this. It's not okay.
If you are having trouble sleeping, I have a great supplement I want you to know about. It's called Roar
lion's mane. So lion's mane has many different benefits for the brain and for the body. Lion's mane improves memory. Lion's mane reduces stress, reduces anxiety. It helps slow down aging by lowering inflammation, and it helps with sleep. It helps you fall asleep faster, stay asleep longer, and fall back to sleep. I learned about lion's mane about 5 years ago when I was having trouble sleeping. When I took it, after about a week, I noticed that I was sleeping better and I was able to fall back to sleep, and I was having vivid dreams, which is really cool. And now I take lion's mane 5 to 6 nights a week. And I do this because it helps me fall back to sleep. So when I wake up, I'm no longer anxious when I wake up, and I'm able to kind of lay still in bed and fall back to sleep. And I get vivid dreams, which I really like, and it improves my REM sleep. So if you'd like to try some of my Roar Lion's Mane risk-free, go to roarlionsmane.com or robertlove.net to learn more. These helicopter parents, I think we should acknowledge that very, very dangerous. I was reading an article that said a young boy was going off to college, so 18, 19 years old, going off to college, and he didn't know how to make friends. And so he's writing his mom at home, like, I don't know how to make friends. Or I think there's another story where like the mom was like trying to make friends for the kid. Yeah. So like the mom is like trying to establish friendships for the kid. If your kid's going off to college, they don't know how to make friends, you're a failure as a parent. You're like, the whole system is broken if this human has not figured out how to make friends with other humans. This is a necessary skill to survive on planet Earth. You need to be able to make friends because we are a tribal species and we need others to survive. And if you can't make friendly contact with a stranger and show that you're a nice person and you want to help and you're not a threat, and contribute something valuable to them, whether it's a smile, whether it's humor, whether it's offering to help them move or whatever it is, if you can't figure out how to do that, you're not fit for survival on planet Earth. And if your child is 18 and they're not fit to survive on planet Earth, that's a problem. I say the same thing about COVID. We can say COVID now that we're not on, now that some of the restrictions have been lifted. This is planet COVID. If you can't survive on this planet being exposed to the COVID virus, you're frankly not fit to be alive here on planet Earth right now because COVID is everywhere. It's mutated a couple times, but you need to be able to handle it, just like we need to be able to handle these basic human instincts. So I think this helicopter parent thing, really dangerous to the future of our species, because if I've tried to hire Gen Z people. I don't know if you tried to do this. There's some of them are difficult to work with. They get upset really easily. Then they ghost me, and they think it's okay to ghost their employer and not say like, hey, I'm not going to be into work today. They just don't respond. I'm like, oh my gosh, what's how did this happen in our society?
Yeah, and I think when I look at the like helicopter parenting, when I try to see causation of that, right? This is where we expand time and look at generational impact. This doesn't like take the responsibility away from people, but it can help them understand something in a context. I said something earlier where we tend to either adopt or rebel against the patterns of our parents, and I think we see this generationally. If there was a generation that was more stay away from emotions, don't talk about them, figure everything out yourself, which can look like it's really great. You go out in the 80s, like we were talking about earlier, you just laughed. My parents weren't like anxious all the time because they just knew I had to be home at 10 o'clock.
Be home by dinner, right?
If I wasn't home 30 or 45 minutes later, they probably didn't go straight to anxiety. They probably got mad first and then they went to anxiety. But I mean, if it can swing the other way, even in a generation that like now they weren't paid attention to. And now it's like, well, I got to pay attention to them. Then we look at what's happened with technology. Like I've caught myself with this. My daughter was born. I bought this. I'm not going to say the name because I think it's probably a great thing, but it was like essentially like a Whoop for kids, right? It was a little sock that they put on and you could track their heart rate and their sleep and all this.
Oh, interesting. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it was really interesting until I'll tell you what happened. Like I was like, I'm going to be the most amazing dad. I'm going to follow and track this stuff. Well, what it didn't tell you is like the app could go down or the Bluetooth could go or she could kick the sock off. So I'm laying thinking I'm going to track this stuff. Then all of a sudden it wouldn't be connected. And I'm laying in bed, sure she's dead.
Oh my
God. And I'm
God.
sprinting across the room. Right. And I'm picturing like my baby still in her crib and I get in there and she just kicked the sock off. Right. Like, and I was like, okay, I don't need this. This is too much information. Same with like GPS and location on phones. And I mean, stuff that's like become normal. It creates its own sense of anxiety. And then there's something Michael Easter, who wrote The Comfort Crisis. He said, I think I heard him say it on a podcast where he said that, we evolved to do really hard things.
Mm-hmm.
We can live our species could live in the Arctic, like without power.
Right? I was at a museum exhibit on human evolution, and our ancestors came from Africa up through modern day Russia into that area, Siberia, and they were able to knit clothing out of like the animals they killed there that allowed them to survive in negative 20-degree Fahrenheit weather. And this was thousands of years ago. I couldn't do this now.
But the way
figured out how to do that thousands of years ago.
the way he put it, which I really liked, is he says we were built to do hard things, but programmed because we're built to do hard things, we're programmed to do the next easiest thing. Those ancestors wouldn't have gone for a jog or lifted weights at the end of the day, right? They would have rested whenever possible. They would have eaten as much because they don't know when they're going to get it. They would have eaten as much food as possible when it was put in front of them because the next meal might be a little ways away. And they would have, interacted only when they needed to, right? Because now they were getting a lot of fitness. Now we don't have to migrate through and make clothes out of animals, but we still are left with that programming of do the next easiest thing. I think that's also in our programming. Again, that doesn't take away our responsibility, but it helps us understand that, we have to put effort into doing hard things. We don't have to hunt. I just have to push a button on my phone and food shows up. It's crazy.
So what's the benefit psychologically of us choosing to do hard things? So I love the cold plunge. It's painful. It's painful every single time, but part of me loves it, part of me hates it. And I do it first thing in the morning, and that part of me really doesn't like it. It's like, okay, this is going to hurt for a little bit, and I just woke up. But I believe there's part of me that's like, okay, if I can do this, I can do other things. If I'm choosing to do this hard thing, this is really good for me. Can you talk about the benefits of choosing these hard things?
If I back up a minute, I think that our biggest challenge psychologically as human beings on the planet today is that we confuse discomfort with threat and respond to it as if it's threat, right? That, especially emotional discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
You and I are walking across the street and a car is about to hit us. I don't want to stop and meditate and breathe and have compassion for the driver, right? I want you to see it or I see it, and we push each other out of the way, even if it scrapes up our knees or we get hurt. Like we're meant, like that's to survive. The problem happens, I go inside at the end of the day and I ask my wife a question and she says no, or responds with something that I perceive as like an attitude, which may not even be that. She might just be stressed out herself. And I react to her as if she's the car about to hit me. That we'll react to these moments of discomfort, especially around our emotions, and we'll react as if it's not okay. And we'll try to get away from it as quickly as possible. The way we try to get away from it is what becomes a problem. Arguing, avoiding, drugs, alcohol, food, sex, whatever it is, right? So coming back to your question, I think the answer often is like, how do we stay with it for the next few seconds, right? Like, often when people are talking to me about like quitting smoking, or quitting anything, I'll say, don't quit. Make an agreement first. Make an agreement that before you have your next cigarette, you're going to breathe for a minute or take 7 breaths. For some people, it might be say a prayer or write a gratitude. Like you're going to do something else. If you still want the cigarette after that, have the cigarette. But you wouldn't believe how many people will come back and go, I didn't need it after that. Like I was able to put a little pause in there. And I think the things like the cold plunge and there's all kinds of other people will say there's benefits and people say there's no benefits physiologically. I think mostly it's that you're able to like lean into something that's hard for a minute. And you do that. The more we do that, we build that muscle, I mean, it's taken a long time, I think, for people to understand. It took a long time for people to understand physical fitness. I mean, 40 years ago, even when we were kids, there was not like a gym on every corner. There wasn't like so many running shoes. Nike came around in the 70s, and it was just like a tire tread. Like if you put those shoes on, you wouldn't even want to walk in them. Like now that stuff's all available. Not everybody's using it, but at least we know that movement, sleep, nutrition is good for you, right?
We know, but we're the sickest we've ever been. We were way healthier in the 70s, which is fascinating. I saw a video from the beach from the 50s, and everybody's thin. And now today, almost 7 out of 10 Americans are overweight or obese. It might be 7.3 or 7.5. It's astounding. We theoretically know so much more, but our behavior has gotten so much worse regarding these things we understand. I want to touch on this because you talked about confusing discomfort with threat. And so not to pick on college students too much, but I heard that some speakers, political speakers, they were conservative or liberal, pick your choice. It's not, I don't think it's exclusive to one group, but students said, we don't want this speaker coming to campus because I don't feel emotionally safe with them on campus. Well, first of all, how are you going to have freedom of speech if someone can't talk about, let's say, a political value, and you don't feel emotionally safe? Number two, who says you get to feel emotionally safe? This is planet Earth. You're going to die. That's pretty certain as of right now. The world is dangerous. Why do you think you get to experience college without feeling emotionally safe the whole time? Aren't you supposed to be challenged with different ideas and concepts that make you question what's right, what's wrong, and what you stand for, and learn new things? And so this idea of people using emotional threat or emotional safety as a means of limiting discussion I think it's new on college campuses, and I think it's really concerning for the future welfare of not only voters and Americans, but just like these humans that are so emotionally fragile.
Yeah, I'm not a political analyst or pundit, but I think that when I look at the individual and relationships, it's important for us to be able to pause enough to understand what is dangerous to us and what isn't. And, I think a question that, what I was saying before was, building that muscle, like we at least know that constant practice in a gym will build muscle. We haven't quite understood that as a whole society around our mental health. And I think it's a very similar thing, like building these practices, and being able to, not see ourselves and others in a fixed way with a label on them, and because once we decide something's dangerous, then we're going to interact with it as if it is. And so I'll often say to people, like, if you're feeling triggered or what you might say is unsafe, ask yourself a question: am I or is anyone around me in immediate physical danger? Chances are, if you're able to ask that question, you're probably not, at least in that moment. I mean, we look at like people like, Erwin Yalom, that talks about like like all anxiety is death anxiety. Like if we carry it out, it's like, if I'm nervous now, it's because I feel like I'm not okay, and I'm not okay really kind of means I'm gonna die if we carry that out. Right. So, being able to like distinguish between that kind of automatic nervous system response that we want to be in there for when we're actually in danger, but be able to also then understand when we're not, so that we can, take a moment to relax, lean into it, and maybe that's where the ability to hear differing opinions or express differing opinions comes about. I don't know if that kind of answers your question there, but, asking ourselves that question: am I really in danger right now?
Am I in physical danger right now? Am I, or is someone around me in physical danger right now? That's a great question. A great way to get free of, am I emotionally safe? I don't know. I don't even know what that means. I feel emotionally safe, but physical safety is something we can assess.
I think it's challenging for each individual in this point in time to understand that, because they're getting so much information. If I like these many things, I'm going to see this reality. And if you like this many things, you're going to see this reality. And we're losing agency in that, and it takes effort to gain that back, because there are, it's beneficial financially for people to help us lose agency around whether it's snacking or voting or whatever.
It's really scary. So the president and the Secretary of Defense gave a talk yesterday, and I looked at the headlines. The headlines said one thing, and they almost all said the same thing. And then I watched it. I watched it kind of in fast forward, trying to pick up bits and pieces. I didn't hear any of the stuff they were talking about in the headlines. And I was paying attention. So I listened to it at double speed. and I heard maybe 50 to 75% of what was said, I did not get the same impression that I got from reading the news media articles, which all said the same thing, which made it seem really true. When you get 10 articles that all have the same headline and the same conclusion, it seems really true. And I was frankly scared. I was like, oh my gosh, is this reality? I got to watch this thing. And then I watched it. I said, I have a very different perspective on what was said and communicated now that I actually saw the thing rather than watch the news media.
I think that comes back to the individual too. What are the narratives that I've been running that are fixed about myself, about my family members, about my world and the place in it, like what's safe and what's not, and being able to question the headlines that I'm putting out, right, and understanding what's, I don't see, uh, I don't see reality. Neither do you. We don't. We see what we see influenced by not only what we're hearing outside of us, but all of our experiences up to this point. I mean, any criminal defense attorney will tell you the eyewitness testimony is the worst type of testimony, especially if more than one eyewitness. They're going to see different things, right? They've got their own, and this can happen very innocuously. You and I could have gone on a vacation with our families 30 years ago and stayed at a cabin, and I'm like, hey, remember that where we were playing outside on the picnic table, we were playing Scrabble, and you're like, no, we were playing Yahtzee. And like, you really believe it's Yahtzee? And I really, a colleague I had, I remember he once said, the first time we retell a story is the least inaccurate. It's already inaccurate.
Yes.
But what are the narratives I'm running? What are my own prejudices, my own fixed beliefs that I have about myself and about, I just recorded a video. We were talking about disagreement, and, we were talking about nonviolent communication, and in order to understand nonviolence, we got to understand violence. And I look to like some of the yogic philosophy around. There's a yogic principle called ahimsa, which is nonviolence, right? And in that kind of context, the violence is like the most dense form is like I attack you physically, right? And more subtle than that is how I speak to you, right? That's actually like in our legal system, that's assault versus battery. Battery is what I do to you. Assault is that I threaten you, right? And threats have an impact. That's like the success of terrorism. It's not that these buildings came down. It's that we think all the buildings are going to come down, right? And so the most dense is like I attack you. The subtle than that is how I speak to you. More subtle than that is how I think about you. More subtle than that is how I think and speak to myself. And the subtle informs the gross. It doesn't start outside in, it starts inside out. Like, what am I bringing? That doesn't mean I have to agree with your beliefs. It doesn't mean I have to do what you say. But when I'm coming into a conversation where there might be conflict or disagreement, what am I bringing to it that doesn't allow for curiosity and openness?
I love that. What am I bringing that does not allow for curiosity and openness? So I'd love your opinion on this. So this was over a decade ago. I had a girlfriend, and she had a therapist who was really helpful to her. And she asked me to come in for a session. And I heard the therapist at one point say, we're going to be dealing with these issues for the rest of our lives. We never get over these things. And something in me triggered. And I said, hey, would you please not tell her she's going to deal with this issue for the rest of her life? Would you please not program her that she's going to be stuck with this problem forever? And he got a little defensive at that point. And so as a therapist, what is your take on that as far as the role of the therapist in free? So I think it's one thing to acknowledge someone's challenges from the past. It's another thing to say you're going to be stuck with those things. You talked about off camera, you talked about inventing a new reality for ourselves. What is the role of the therapist in freeing up our fixed beliefs about ourselves or about others that are limiting?
Right. So, and it's not much about necessarily inventing a new reality. It's like understanding that these fixed beliefs have been thrust upon us in a way, right? Like we didn't choose our caregivers. We didn't choose and again, this isn't about like releasing me from any responsibility or accountability in my life or blaming caregivers. It's just a simple understanding of I was shaped in this way, right? And if I'm left with fixed limiting beliefs, I end up not being able to create. I'm just plagiarizing from my past again and again, right? If you talk about authenticity as a word, like people say, I get to be whoever I am. I don't know what that means. I like to look at it as like the root word of authenticity is the same as the root word of author, right? That I get to be the author of my life. And an author writes something that didn't really exist before. They're not if they write the same story, they're a plagiarizer, right? I know there's different types of authors, whether it's nonfiction or fiction, but in a fiction, if they write the exact same story in fiction, they're plagiarizing, right? If in science, if you publish the exact same result without doing your own work, you're a plagiarizer, right?
Just funny side note. Did you hear the story about some scientists using AI to write their papers, and they made up a non-scientific word? It's fascinating. So a couple of people are to blame for this. So one, the quote scientist who had AI write their paper for them, and it reviewed a book. Let's take this book. It's called Reversing Alzheimer's by Dr. Heather Sanderson, dear friend of mine. So the AI read the book, but it confused these two words, like words from across the page. And so it made that a term. And the term was some sort of nonsense term. We'll say it's raccoon motorcycle. Like that's not a thing, but it took those two words. And then they submitted this paper. So number one, they made the mistake of not reading their own paper. Then this paper was accepted by peer review. So number two, the person reviewing the paper didn't understand it, right? Because this is nonsense term. And then a bunch of other quote scientists used AI to write their paper, or they read this paper, they didn't understand this term, and then that term got into their paper. So now this nonsense term, raccoon motorcycle, has made its way into multiple peer-reviewed published papers. I don't know who's doing the review because they're putting their stamp of approval on something that they don't understand because it's not a real thing. This word was made up, and so now because lazy, plagiarizing, whatever word you want to use for these quote unquote scientists, they had AI write their paper. It made up a nonsense word, and now multiple papers are citing this nonsense word as if it's a legit term, and it's found its way into the peer-reviewed science. I find that hilarious. I mean, it's one thing to use AI to help you write a paper. It's another to have it write it, and then for you not to read your own paper that you're submitting, and then to review the paper and not actually read it. Right? I think that's hilarious.
Well, if they keep using it, it's going to become an actual term. Like I think it was a few years ago, literally had been used, which means actually, but it had been used, people say literally, and it's more figuratively. So now in the dictionary, literally says, the definition says actual or figurative.
So both, right? It's
because of the use of it. But,
right.
I coming back to what you were asking me, that when we can understand, I think we do have this kind of general shaping that'll happen that under stress we might return to. It doesn't mean that that's all bad. Those are the parts of us that have made us amazing and different and unique from other human beings. And so I don't really believe that we're going to be facing these challenges or have this problem for the rest of your life. I think though, when we face new things that we haven't faced before and we go under stress, we can revert to some of those kind of older patterns in a new way. We were talking about him earlier, Neil Strauss, my friend, he used to say like, you're going up a mountain, and if you're going around in it, you're going to come back to the same view. And if you don't realize you're going up, you're going to think it's the same view, but you're actually higher up. Right. And so, and I like that because, if we really understand ourselves and we understand what some of that shaping is, this becomes an asset for us, because now when I face something new, and it comes back up, maybe it comes in a different way, or the challenge there, I know how to deal with it. If we've successfully worked through it in therapy, now it's like, oh, this makes sense to me, that this is kind of my programming. It's also my programming. I think the problem is that in that scenario, they're looking at the programming is all negative, but like we have assets and liabilities. It's almost like we're a balance sheet, right? And sometimes the liabilities are assets, and sometimes the assets are liabilities, right? Like you don't, just because like anger as an emotion might see as a liability, but anger has a beautiful, as an experience, is useful. It gives me the energy to establish boundaries in places where I might not otherwise do that. Anxiety, if I was a caveman laying in the cave, forgive my very rudimentary and my kid got up and left the cave and I woke up, I don't want to lay there and go, oh, I want anxiety and energy, which we call anxiety, to be energy to get me up to go get my kid.
Yeah, that anger, that mama bear anger, really, really helpful.
We're still kind of this, as a species, we're still operating kind of analog in a digital world, like and we don't have a place to expend a lot of that energy that we had. So we end up spending it in our mind, trying to figure things out and numb it out. And,
one reason why physical exercise is so expensive or so important, because we got to get rid of some of this pent up energy, because we're not working in the fields. We're not hunting, gathering, and we're not running from predators. And so we gotta release this some way. I know we're getting short on time, and I really wanted to get I really wanted your insights on how we can free our minds from trauma and addiction. So Ryan, I'd love for you to share some of your favorite tools in helping us with trauma and addiction. I know this is a whole talk in and of itself. I know this is a 3-hour potential conversation here. I'd love to help make this practical and useful for people who want to get started helping free themselves from trauma and addiction.
Yeah, I mean, I think some very simple things that can help people right away. I mean, we talk about, physical fitness, nutrition, sleep. Stillness is so important in some way. Whether it doesn't mean you have to go out and meditate for hours right off the bat, but if you can take moments throughout your day, even if it's 2 minutes, 3 minutes, right? I mean, I look at to be still and focus on your breath. I mean, you don't have to go further than getting on an airplane, and now you can have these meditation apps on the screen in front of you. So it's kind of out there in the world that people get that, but it's not something that's just like so esoteric or touchy-feely that you're trying to do. It's actually, the trauma or stress that we experience, we experience it in our physiology. It's not an experience in our mind. I mean, you can tell me, but I don't think we even have nerve endings in our brain. It's like we only need, for brain surgery, we probably only need to have a Novocaine because they got to cut through our scalp. Like, we're not experiencing it there. We're experiencing sensation in our body that then we're interpreting as whatever we're interpreting as: anxiety, fear, stress. So if the experience is in the body, the healing needs to be in the body, right? And what I think, what is happening when we're under stress is there's a part of us that's sympathetic. In the autonomic nervous system, there's a sympathetic and parasympathetic. The sympathetic is more in charge of what's, I know there's better terms for this now, but just very simply put, kind of the fight or flight, which is also just us using energy, right? I kind of engaging that part if I'm leaning forward or standing up. Like we need stress. Like we need the ability to stress our system to be able to move around throughout the day. And then the parasympathetic, which is more of the kind of rest and digest, that's more activated when I'm sleeping and things like that. So when we look at when we're under stress that is not needed, like an excess stress, or as Hans Selye called eustress, right? I mean, distress, excuse me, we're more activated in that sympathetic. We'll tell people to just relax or chill out or get some sleep. Well, you can't just it's not about deactivating the sympathetic. It's really more about activating the parasympathetic. So how do we do that? We do that through the physiology. The fastest way is through breath.
Can you give some example of some breathing you can do?
A breathing that I love is in yoga tradition, it's called the Shitali breath. It's very simple. You just breathe in through your nose. And as you exhale through softly pursed lips as if you're breathing through a straw, right? And make the exhale very slow and longer than the inhale. The exhale is what mostly activates our parasympathetic nervous system. My belief, I don't know if this is proven anywhere, but experientially, is that, there's kind of a breathing pattern that we're going to have, bringing in more air if we're in fight or flight. And if we have the ability to slow down and breathe that slowly, it's going to send a signal to our brain and body. You're not in danger. You can chill out now.
Just doing 2 breaths like that. I feel the difference. I don't know if you can hear the difference.
It's incredible. Now, if you think about people who smoke, next time you're out, watch people smoke or vape. What do? They breathe in, they hold it at the top, and then they let it go. I'm not suggesting people start smoking, but I really believe that a byproduct to that is it's one of the few times people take deep breaths throughout your day.
Take a deep breath.
Use that. Instead of taking a smoke break, take a breathing break. It doesn't have to be, it could be, like you said, 2 breaths, 2 minutes, 7 breaths. Very easy. Starts to bring us to some sort of stillness. We start seeing what's going on as it is rather than how we are or how we were, right?
One of my roommates was a smoker, or still former roommate, still is a smoker. He would take smoke breaks, and I offered him oxygen. This is 95% oxygen. Atmosphere is 20% oxygen. It's just like 5 breaths at once. He started doing this, and he he's like, wow, that's as good as a cigarette. And so he just take a deep breath of this. He's like, wow, because he would just take a couple puffs and come back inside. It's like, wow, I don't need that. So this actually helped reduce his smoking, which is fascinating. That just as you mentioned, those deep breaths, actually getting that deep inhalation, is sometimes what the smoker wants, or just what we humans want. We want that deep breathing just to help relax us.
So for very quick things, shifting your breath like that, you can do that anywhere. I look at like proactive and reactive tools. Proactive is something you schedule, right? Reactive is something you use in the moment. So that type of breath you can use any moment. You could also schedule that. It could be proactive. You could say, set alarm on your phone and you do it throughout the day. You could say, before I get on any Zoom meeting, I'm going to breathe, take 7 breaths like that. When I get off, before I transition home, you can put markers in your day, right? It doesn't have to be, it's much easier to find, I think, for people 7 1-minute periods than 7 minutes, right? Like, it's like watching a TV commercial throughout your day, right? You pick up your phone and do it. So you could also say, before I pick up my phone, to look on Instagram or TikTok, unless you're going to like mine or your stuff, they can do that first. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, that you're gonna do this. So that's like a reactive tool. Proactively, there's some great tools out there around like yoga nidra or non-sleep deep rest. Those are really easy meditation tools because they're done laying down. It's almost like taking a nap. And then of course, seated meditation, anything like that is great too. The times that you can get stillness allows our nervous system to start to reset. Around addiction, if you're any sort of craving, that those can work. But if you're just questioning, you're like, am I addicted to this, or is it problematic? A question I like that
Directly to like food addiction, sugar addiction, and/or social media addiction. I think those are some things that are really plaguing a lot of Americans today because our food system has been contaminated, and our food is very addictive. I remember when I was in graduate school, we were coming back from a University of Texas football game, and one of the mothers of one of the kids we were with bought us McDonald's for breakfast. I remember eating a McDonald's Egg McMuffin sandwich, and then as soon as I was done, it's like, oh my gosh, I want another one. And I don't know what it was in there. I don't know if it was sugar or sugar mixed with some sort of fat, or my body was craving it, and I knew it was bad for me. And I thought, wow, there is some serious drugs in this food, because I never eat this. And now that's all I could think about for the next 10 minutes. And so I think a lot of people are suffering in the United States from food addiction to highly processed foods, or foods that are designed by tobacco scientists. Tobacco companies took over large food companies in the 1980s and engineered the food to be extra addictive, extra palatable. And so how can we help? What are some tools that people can use to specifically apply to food addiction?
Well, I mean, I think, first, really having an understanding. I mean, when we look at things like food, sex, gambling, other addictions like that, we consider those process addictions. It's much more challenging to see that it's a problem. It's also much more challenging for people to work with or to be free of, because like you can't, if it's alcohol, you can just stop alcohol. I mean, it becomes a process to do, but you can live without alcohol.
Yes.
You can't live food, right?
By the way, I'm alcohol free. It's been great. It's one of the best decisions I made in my life. I sleep so much better. I have better energy. Great decision to let go of alcohol.
Well, completely food free. It might feel great for about 12 days, and then you might have a problem after that, right? But alcohol free is good, right? So I think it's more nuanced in understanding. Like a great question that I think is a great question is, does it have me or do I have it? Am I using it or is it using me? That can fit in with social media. I mean, and a great thing is to be able to take a break from it, and notice what happens. We say this with alcohol too, like take a break from it. If all you're doing is thinking about not doing it or doing it, you probably have a challenge with it, at least now. Same thing with social media and, or food. And I think putting a pause in between your desire and craving and your action, again, going back to the thing, like I can always do it. Like before I go eat that food that I said I'm not going to eat, like instead of being in resistance to it, like I'm never going to have that again. Just say before I do that, and maybe with food, I'm going to drink some water first, or I'm going to, take a breathing break, or with the phone, I'm going to call a friend before I get on the phone and look at social media. I think we get in these very fixed things with people where it's like, I just need to cut it out. And then they cut it out and then they're in such resistance to it that then when they fail, they just kind of go all out on it. And there's, I don't think we're going to live in a world where no social media exists. And, I think you and I are hopefully using it in a way that we can help people, but that would also require them looking at it. Right. So how are we using it, and how is it using us, and really understanding that first, and then finding some things that you'd like to put there in place of it before you do it, or scheduling time to do it.
So instead of going cold turkey, try inserting a healthy practice before picking up the phone and scrolling, before going to the kitchen and grabbing the highly palatable food. Is there a breathing practice? Is there a health practice? Or is there something else we can insert before going for that thing? So can you eat some fresh fruit before going for the Twinkies? Something like that.
Yeah. And then being aware of what you're thinking, what you're feeling. I oftentimes, when people tell me they want to quit smoking, instead of telling them just to quit right away, I'll say, okay, next time you smoke, like, really pay attention to what your experience is. Like, what does it feel like when you want it? What are you experiencing when you pull the pack out, or when you light it, or what the first breath does? I had somebody that did that the other day, and they told me I slowed down and I realized they didn't even like it.
Wow. Amazing.
He's like, he was smoking a ton of things. He's like, I realized I don't even like it. It's not even doing anything for me.
Well, would that work for hyper palatable food? So before, I've seen, when I watch obese people eat, I've noticed that they eat really quickly and they don't seem to savor their food. So would it be a good strategy before eating that hyper palatable food, whether it's fast food or ultra processed foods, really slow down, like look at the package, hold it, open it, smell it, and like really be present with the activity and see how they feel?
Yeah, I wouldn't call myself an expert as a dietitian or anything like that. I would say with anything that we're trying to change our relationship with, slowing down and building, and first noticing what our relation. If we want to change our relationship with something, we've got to understand what our relationship is first. And it might not be eliminating that completely. It might be, and there's some great work around mindful eating and really intuitive eating. Yeah, I forget the woman who wrote the book on it, but it's really, going by the body signals, and first you have to understand them, and not necessarily, that sometimes eating what we consider bad foods is better than eating no food, right? And there's different environments in that, and it's a little more complex. And again, I'm not the expert around that, but I think with anything, it's slowing down to understand our relationship with it. And with that kind of stuff, it's more complex than I can understand, even, and so get some help with that. As a mentor of mine used to say, Ryan, you're not qualified to grade your own paper. So, like, and grading my own paper, sometimes I was giving myself an A when I didn't deserve it. And a lot of times I was giving myself an F when I didn't deserve it. So to be able to understand what our relationship is with these things in order to change it based on what our goals are. Because some people decide they want to change something because they see it on social media, and they don't necessarily need to change that. It might be something else they need to work on.
So I love this. So slowing down to really understand your relationship with it. I think whatever that is, whether it's understanding any aspect of our physical health, I run a business, so understanding my business, relationships, that's a really great idea. And as far as grading your own paper, at least you read your own paper rather than having AI read it and just submitting that without having read it.
That is true. Although I don't know if I was in the environment today, what I would have done for school papers anyway.
So we're out of time here. So Ryan, this was just fantastic. Thank you so much. If people want to find out more about either working with you or follow you on social media, where's the best place for them to go?
A couple places. So I've been putting out some weekly videos on YouTube, so you can find me at, I think it's RJ Soave, RJSOAVE, or at my website, which is just ryansoave.com, or on Instagram. I've got a link tree where it's ryan.soave, and you can find all of the places that you can find me. I'm really trying to put out a lot of no-cost tools for people
doing that
to just be better versions of themselves and understand who they are and what their relationships are with their life and others.
Thank you for doing that. I'm envious that you have yourname.com. I tried to get robertlove.com. Someone has it and they're not even using it. So I'm robertlove.net. So you got the .com. I'm envious of that.
.NET, maybe .NET will come around again.
You can buy .NET just so you have a second one. And thank you sincerely for the work you do and the work that you put out, and just trying to give people low cost or no cost tools to be a better version of themselves. Like that's what I strive to do. And thank you for doing that.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.